Historically, a three-fund portfolio has been one of the best ways for an investor to take advantage of the growth in the market and also have a marginal level of safety with ETFs and diversification. Today, I'll be explaining my brand new three-fund portfolio that gets us more growth in the long term while also paying less fees, fundamentally holding similar funds as the old three-fund portfolio. So the old three-fund portfolio had three baselines. Number one, you have your benchmark. The base of this old three-fund portfolio was VOO, which tracks the S&P 500 index. However, this fund does have a 0.03 expense ratio, which is really good, but I think we can do better. Next, number two, they chose a growth ETF. The second fund in three portfolio that investors used with the old three-fund portfolio was QQQM, or the NASDAQ 100 top technology stocks and the top non-financial stocks. But the problem with this is the QQQ, or the NASDAQ technology stocks, has ran up so much over time that they're actually really overvalued in a bad place right now. And also, this ETF comes in a 0.15 expense ratio, which is really expensive compared to VOO, and we can do a lot better. Lastly, the third fund in the old three-fund portfolio was a dividend ETF, giving us safe growth. This dividend ETF was SCHD. The problem with this, yes, it does give good dividends, but the ETF focuses on too much dividends, while we can get better opportunities with the same amount of dividends but a little bit more growth, so it can grow more in the long term and get more performance. Now that you know that three-fund portfolios are one of the best investments you can choose for the long term, and I've showed you the old three-fund portfolio, let's get into the new one. So for our baseline ETF, the old one was VOO, and for us, we're going to knock that over and choose our new one, SPLG. This is State Street's S&P 500 ETF. Instead of having that 0.03 ETF, we're having a smaller 0.02. I know this sounds small, but the other two have a lot bigger difference. But basically for this, in the long term, over 30 or 40 years that we actually plan to use this three-fund portfolio strategy, we'll be saving thousands of dollars. So if you want to have an extra $10,000 to spend on whatever you want in retirement, this is what you should choose instead of VOO. Our second fund is in the growth sector. The old three-fund portfolio uses QQQM, the NASDAQ's top 100 technology and non-financial stocks. For our three-fund portfolio, we're going to use SCHG, Charles Schwab Growth ETF. QQQM's expense ratio was 0.15, and SCHG's expense ratio is 0.04. That means this ETF is almost 3 times less expensive to hold. Now I said that the old fund QQQM is inherently overvalued. That's because it lets anything in that's in the top 100 of these technology and non-financial stocks and doesn't actually track on anything. It just takes stuff that's non-financial. And historically, technology has ran up a lot. But what SCHG does is it passes for 5 years of past growth and 5 years of projected future growth. So this way, it kicks out companies that aren't going to grow as much. And it also kicks out companies that are just getting started and we don't know if they're going to actually keep building up. We get all this actively managed features for even a cheaper expense ratio. SCHG has actually outperformed QQQM in the last 5 years. But if you do zoom back, QQQM has outperformed SCHG in all time. But we're not worried about this because now fundamentally technology is one of the most overvalued sectors in the entire market. And for us to outperform in the sector, we need to kick out all the bad companies and bring in the ones that are actually going to grow. That's why SCHG is fundamentally better than QQQM in a technical sense and also expense sense. Lastly, for our third fund in the portfolio is a dividend ETF. And in the old three-fund portfolio, they use SCHD, which had about around a 3% dividend yield. So what the dividend means is regardless of what the market did after the year, SCHD would give us 3% of what we hold directly. But the problem with SCHD is it actually picks the companies with the highest dividends and it doesn't screen for anything else. So that means we're getting these fundamentally safe companies, but they're not going to grow as much as we would like. So to fix that, I introduced DGRO iShares Dividend Growth ETF. Instead of just picking stocks that have the highest dividends, this is going to pick the ones that actually had a consistent 5-year dividend growth rate. It also includes a 5-year projected growth rate too. So that way we get these safe stocks that have been building up over time, and these stocks we know are going to increase their dividends over time. Fundamentally, DGRO has outperformed SCHD in the 5-year by a lot. The only downside I see of holding DGRO over SCHG is it actually gives us a little bit more of a higher expense ratio. But since dividend is not going to be the main part of our portfolio, coming in at less than 20%, this is not going to affect us in the long term. And in the long term, this extra growth we're going to be getting from these companies is way better than the lower expense ratio. So for our overview, instead of VU as our baseline, we use SPLG, which is cheaper to hold and gives us the exact same thing in the S&P 500. In our growth sector, instead of QQQM with expense ratio of 0.15, we take SCHG with our expense ratio of 0.04. And we also screen for growth. So we take out the overvalued companies and put in the ones that are projected to grow more in the long term, which increases our gains. This way we can stay away from the overvalued tech companies. And lastly, in our dividend category, instead of SCHG, we are putting in DGRO. Yes, we are losing out on 1% dividends, but 2.5% dividends is just as good as 3. And in the long term, DGRO is going to grow much more than SCHG could. Now that we have our 3-fund portfolio set, we need to know how much to put in each. I'm going to break it down how much you should have in each by age. So if you're a young investor like me, we want mostly growth. So if you're under 25, this part's for you. So of course, we're going to pick up our baseline SPLG, which is going to be at 30% of our portfolio. This is going to help with the volatility of our portfolio. Next, we're going to choose 60% SCHG. Since we're young, we want growth as much as possible because it's going to outperform in the long term. And we have a lot of years to handle this volatility. And lastly, we have 10% in DGRO. We want to start compounding on that dividends at a young age, and we can increase it as we grow older. Next is middle-aged. If you're around 25 to 45 years old, this is what you should be investing in. With this age group, we're going to increase our position in SPLG from 30 to 40%. What this is going to do, it's going to take our money out of tech and put it into financial companies that are more stable. Then we're going to take our position in SCHG from 60% to 40% in a 20% increase. 40% is still a large chunk of our holding, and even if you're entering this middle-age gap, I still believe that you should be investing in growth since you're not going to be retiring the next 5 years. And lastly, for DGRO, we're going to take our 10% and turn it into 20%. I am fundamentally a growth investor, so I believe dividends are a very important part of your portfolio, but I do believe it should be a smaller part of your portfolio. Of course, you can be something different and change it to a higher percentage if you would like. Lastly, this is if you're above 45. With our SPLG proportion, we're going to increase that from 40% all the way up to 60%. Now that we're starting to get near retirement, we want to actually take the benchmark over growth because we want less volatility. We're going to take our position SCHG growth from 40% all the way down to 10%. As a growth investor, I still love growth, but as we're going to enter retirement, we want something that's less volatile. And lastly, in dividends in DGRO, we're going to increase it from 20% all the way to 30%. Dividends are a more important part of retirement, and a lot of people like to take dividends out as they retire. But for us as growth investors, we're going to use the 4% rule. If you did everything correctly, invest over time, you should have millions and millions of dollars in your portfolio by now. What the 4% rule is we're going to take out 4% of our portfolio every year. So we're going to take out thousands of dollars every year once we hit retirement to pay for our expenses. And our portfolio will still be averaging around 8 to 10% growth. So that means even with taking out money for expenses in our multi-million-dollar portfolio, we will still be growing by 4 to 6% year by year. And you personally can decide to take out less or take out more. You personally may like holding more dividends or more S&P 500, or you may like holding growth stocks, but that's all personal opinion. I'm just giving you my take and what I'm going to do in my taxable account. Overall, it's just preference. But for the actual portfolio part and the 3 funds, I personally believe these 3 are actually the best. And each allocation for each section is all up to personal preference. And that's why this new 3-fund portfolio with SPLG S&P 500, SCHG growth, and DGRO dividends beats the old 3-fund portfolio with VU as its S&P 500 base, QQQM as its growth, and SCHD for its dividends. Thank you guys for watching, and maybe think about subscribing if you enjoy this type of content. I do content for the younger generation and the older generation to learn how to invest over time. My channel is solely based on facts and statistics, so it's not just my opinion. It's what statistically is the right way to invest.